Good evening, everyone. I will open up tonight's Conservation Commission hearings meeting. It's 6:02, and we have a quorum of commissioners. Tonight, we are meeting here at the Wacoyet Meeting Room, Mashpee Town Hall, 16 Great Neck Road North. This meeting is being broadcast live on cable channel 8 locally here. And I believe, it's streamed live via Zoom, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Before we do begin, if you would like to join me in a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like to begin with a moment of silence tonight for members of our own family that have gone on before us, that have provided us with food, shelter, protection, and love. Thank you. Okay. As always, I will start with public comment for anything that is not posted on tonight's agenda. So if we have anyone that would like to address the commission, this would be the time. Yes, sir. If you can have your name and address for the record, we can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matthew Haney, trustee of Gooseberry Island Trust. I'm coming here today to, I think most of you guys know, on the draft town meeting articles, there's an article for funding and purchasing of Gooseberry Island. So I wanted to give you guys a little background to help you with your due diligence so you can understand the situation, because I know a lot of this stuff predates a lot of you guys members here. So I'm the trustee of Gooseberry Island Trust. Gooseberry Island is about a 4-acre island. I'll give you the land court plan here. I'll leave it with you. So just give you a little background. We went to the ZBA and we proposed an off-the-grid house on the island. The ZBA rejected that proposal. So to satisfy that rejection, we started permitting a bridge, filing an NOI with the Conservation Commission. After many hearings, the Conservation Commission denied the NOI without prejudice, and so we appealed at the DEP, and that while we were at DEP, we consulted with DEP, and they want us to revise the plans to go from a wood bridge to a steel bridge to remove the pilings from the salt marsh. So we removed the pilings from the salt marsh. DEP said, we're okay with that, meets the performance standards of the Wetland Protection Act. And then the commissioner at the judiciary hearing said, no, you can't make the plan change. You got to refile the NOI for the steel bridge. So we don't want to waste our resources refiling for a NOI for steel bridge. We went back to the zoning board. We said, zoning board, we're going to build a wood or a steel bridge. Will you grant us the variances? They said no. So we ended up suing the zoning board in court for a regulatory taking. The zoning board, the court took the position that we never presented the steel bridge to the zoning board, so the regulatory taking claim wasn't ripe. But they also said in the decision that if you regulate the property, make it unbuildable, you have to pay the property owner for regulatory taking. I got the decision here, I'll leave it. So since we already presented this steel bridge to the zoning board in conjunction with the proposal with the wood bridge, we appealed that decision to the First Circuit. The First Circuit said that denial that we received from the zoning board wasn't really a denial. It was pretty much saying you got to go to conservation first with the steel bridge. So for the ripen the regulatory taking claim, it was dismissed without prejudice, so we can refile once the Conservation Commission denies the steel bridge NOI, or they don't deny it, and then the zoning board, if they deny the proposal to access the island for the steel bridge. So we said to ourselves, clearly the town doesn't want that property developed. People in town, they don't want this property developed for whatever reason. And we proposed to the town for them to buy the island under mutual agreeable terms. It's got to be mutual agreeable terms. So the CPC is going to be actually meeting in about 25 minutes to discuss funding the project there to purchase the property. And we look at it as there's a lot of grants out there. You know, there's a lot of funding sources. You know, we'll work with the town on the funding sources, but it's got to be mutual agreeable terms. So I think it's important for the Conservation Commission, because they actually, I think it maybe predates some of you guys, the Conservation Department submitted an application to the CPC to purchase this property. It actually, believe it or not, in the 50s, the town tried to buy this property back in the 50s multiple times, but at the time the town was in receivership, so they couldn't get the overseer's sign off on the purchase. So they never end up purchasing the property. So it's one of these properties in town, we look at that it's irreplaceable. I mean, it's priceless. It's a 4-acre island. I mean, it's the largest waterfront piece of property in town, but clearly the town doesn't want the property developed. So this is the only course of action where the town could have purchased the property under mutual agreeable terms, use funding sources, and not affects the tax base. So that's what we propose. It's playing out there at the CPC. It's going to be going to the select board and probably to the town meeting. But, the Conservation Commission, I think, really should be taking the lead on this. I think you guys maybe are behind the scenes, but still, I just want to bring it to your attention to help you with your due diligence. I'll leave a copy of the decisions. There's the land court plan, the First Circuit decision, and the district court decision regarding the regulatory taking litigation. So it is an opportunity right now because the town has spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney fees dealing with this thing. And, I think at the end of the day, it's in the town's best interest that they purchase the property under mutual agreeable terms. And like I said, we'll work with them on the funding. So we'll give them time because there's a lot of grants out there. I know the open space plan expired and they need a little time to get the open space plan up and running to get the grants through the open space plan program. So, we'll work with the town, but, as long as the town's making progress, we'll sit tight. But if not, we have no choice but to proceed with the Conservation Commission. And, if we have to present the steel bridge to the Conservation Commission, and if you guys deny the steel bridge, per the court decision, we can go file the regulatory taking case again and get our money that way. Because, you don't have to allow the development of the property, but if you don't allow, we have rights under the Constitution where you can't regulate property, get free open space. I mean, the court's already ruled on that. So anyways, I just want to bring that to your attention. So hopefully everybody works together here, and it's I think it could be a great opportunity for the town. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you can leave those
Mr.
with
Chairman, can I ask you a
Alyssa.
question?
Yes, Marjorie, go ahead.
I just wanted to know if the paperwork from the previous speaker for the application is somewhere in at the office. I don't need to see it now, but it's available through the Conservation Department.
The former applications, the paperwork on the other,
Yeah, there's
Is
a
that-
very long history there that precedes
Yeah.
my birth.
I believe we
So-
have that, right?
We don't have the
Is
actual
it-
application. We have
Yeah,
the
that's
narrative.
available, okay.
The narrative.
Yeah, but we don't have the application.
Yeah, we'll have staff put that together, what we do have on file, and make that available to all the commissioners, sure.
That'd be great,
Yep,
thanks.
you're welcome. Okay, anyone else that would like to address the commission on subjects not on our agenda? No? Okay, great. So let's move right into our hearing agenda tonight. The first thing on our list is a presentation from the Cape Cod Commission. Ladies, thank you for coming.
Yeah, you can come up to-
Whatever's, yeah, gotta have the microphones. Terrific.
Great, thank you. I'm Heather McElroy, the Natural Resource Manager at the Cape Cod Commission. I'm glad to be with you this evening, and I'm joined by my colleague, Michelle White, Special Projects Coordinator. We've been working on some regulatory tools for development in the floodplain, and over the last 4 or so years, and I'm here to sort of review that for you and hopefully have a little bit of a discussion because we understand you've been working on floodplain regulations as well. So with that, next, please, Drew. So just a few slides to sort of set the context here. Cape Cod has a very large coastline, and it's vulnerable to multiple coastal hazards. And increasingly, sea level rise is going to impact our shoreline. Next. 19% of the region is located in a flood hazard area as designated by FEMA. Next. And that represents, by some measures, $16 billion worth of assessed value within that area. So clearly, there are good reasons to try to reduce the risk to properties, as well as improve protection of natural resources and the ecosystem services that they provide. Next. And I forgot, in addition, 30% of the critical facilities that our towns have identified in their hazard mitigation plans are located within these flood hazard areas. So yet another reason to take action to try to address the risks associated with storm-related flooding. So just a couple slides on what brings us to this point. Climate change is an event that I'm sure everyone has heard a lot about, but just some of the impacts that we're feeling here and that are anticipated here on the Cape. Temperatures are anticipated to rise over the course of the coming century. Current average temperatures are just under 50 degrees Fahrenheit annual. These are annual average temperatures, and they could go up to as much as 58 degrees, so up 8 degrees Fahrenheit over the course of the century. We expect many more severe storms. I think those of us who've been here for a while are observing this already. 2018 was a year when we had a whole series of really intense coastal storms that brought some significant damage to our shorelines. So we're having both winter storms and tropical storms, and those are anticipated to continue to intensify, bringing storm surge and rainfall that will create flooding. And exacerbating those issues is sea level rise. So there's already been sea level rise over the last, as measured over the last 100 years or so, but we anticipate between 1.3 to 3 feet of additional sea level rise by mid-century, so by 2050. And potentially as much as 10 feet by the end of the century if sort of worst case carbon emission scenarios actually play out. Next. I won't go through all of these, a few more just on climate effects, but particularly precipitation and inland flooding contributes to our concerns about the coastal flooding. Presently, we can anticipate, really intense storms bringing 1 inch or more of precipitation one day a year. By the end of the century, that could be 2.5 days. I actually think that that's an underestimate based on just current experience. And then other things that we're seeing are marine heat waves. You've likely heard about increasing temperatures in the Gulf of Maine, especially. It's happening worldwide, but the Gulf of Maine has increasing ocean temperatures faster than any other water body, which has impacts on coastal ecosystems. And then we are also, on the other side of that, at risk for drought and wildfire. Next. So how do those coastal threats sort of play out? Here we have an image of, erosion is a natural process, but increasingly it is having impacts on developed properties. So this is a coastal bank in Bourne, I believe. Next. And this was a commercial property in Orleans at Nauset Beach. Liam's restaurant was removed due to, I think this was in 2018. Elements of the septic system are now exposed in this image. Next. And then storm surge. These are, again, this is Bourne. We're already feeling flooding in various places around the Cape. Next. And some folks are taking action to try to, not get flooded. So increasingly, property owners are elevating their homes or taking other action to create barriers, which it can be a good solution, but can also really change the character of our communities. Next. And then some images about sea level rise. This is Sissuit Harbor in Dennis, I believe, and this is just sunny day flooding. This is just very high tide. Next. So, and actually one more, Drew, please. It highlights this one strategy on this large list that I wanted to focus on. So a couple of years back, the Cape Cod Commission conducted a climate adaptation planning process. We engaged stakeholders and developed a climate action plan that identified 11 priority strategies, one of which was identifying approaches to managing development in coastal resource areas region-wide, which brings us to this project that I want to discuss this evening. Next. So you have, I probably don't need to go into much detail for you all, as I know that you've been working on looking at changing your regulations for development in the floodplain. But land subject to coastal storm flowage is a protected resource area protected under the Wetlands Protection Act. There are a few performance standards presently for that, and currently flood protections rely on the FEMA flood maps, which are based on the extent of historic flooding and do not consider future potential flooding, as we've just sort of reviewed. We can anticipate with sea level rise and more intense storms. Next. So I'm sure you're also likely aware that the state has issued some draft performance standards for land subject to coastal storm flowage, or LSCSF, but they haven't promulgated them yet, unknown when that might happen. And we had heard through our work with towns on their hazard mitigation planning processes and also on their municipal vulnerability preparedness plans that there was interest in looking at regulations for the floodplain. So next, we applied for a grant, 2 grants ultimately. The first was actually both through the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, a planning assistance grant. The first one started in 2019 and resulted in the development of a coastal resiliency model bylaw. The idea there was to improve natural resource protection, flood protection, and land use strategies to reduce development risk in the floodplain and to enable natural resource migration, importantly. And then our colleagues at Barnstable County Cooperative Extension and HUEC grant, Shannon Hulst, you may have heard of her. She works on floodplain issues. She also took up an effort to develop higher standards for our zoning bylaws across the Cape and develop a model higher standards zoning bylaw. She didn't quite finish that work under an initial grant, but we rolled finishing that up into the next grant. And next slide, please, Drew, which is the work that we've just finished up this past June, which is developing regulations. So the bylaw, the Wetlands Coastal Resiliency Bylaw, was a bylaw for administration under the conservation commissions. And we heard from conservation commissions that they would also like regulations to support that bylaw. So then this work is the development of a model coastal resiliency bylaw that gets into a little bit more detail about how to apply the provisions of the bylaw through the Conservation Commission's processes. So it includes performance standards for work within LSCSF. It also importantly, and I think differently from many other bylaws, expands the regulatory jurisdiction of the LSCSF by creating a coastal resilience zone. So by using and making reference to what we call the best available coastal flooding model, and I'll get into that in a second, a conservation commission can actually establish a slightly greater jurisdictional area based on projections of anticipated flooding. So the idea with the bylaw is that that would be added to existing wetland bylaws that the community has in place. But the model is designed to allow you to customize it to community interests, because we recognize that not every Cape Town or other municipalities in Massachusetts necessarily want to regulate in the same way. Next. So the next grant essentially just builds on that first one. And again, as I said, sort of gets into the details. I think I've actually covered probably most of what's on this slide, but just to cover some of the elements. We're looking to increase the protection of our coastal resources and the environment. I mean, that's really the key purpose of the Conservation Commission under the Wetlands Protection Act. Allow for natural resource migration, which increasingly is a need as sea level rises. Our coastal resource areas are moving, typically landward, maybe not always landward, but creating a way to accommodate that anticipated migration landward. We want to reduce environmental harm and damage, plan for future changes to the extents of our coastal resource areas. Again, as they migrate, they're likely moving up in elevation and more landward. And also give towns some consistency between the regulations administered by the different boards. So by developing both the regulations consistent with the bylaw, and then also developing a zoning bylaw that the town could adopt for administration by the planning board and or the zoning board of appeals. You then have a whole suite of regulations that are complementary and can help the community do more across those regulatory processes. Next. So we, in this, actually in both planning processes, we worked with a group of towns, specifically with their conservation administrators or agents, to help better understand what their concerns were and to hone our focus on in this effort. So what we heard from them was they wanted stricter standards for development in buffer area of floodplains. They wanted to require outdoor accessories to be secured so that during a storm event they reduce damage and don't become storm debris. Wanted to reduce channelization of floodwater from activities in the floodplain. Wanted to make sure that we're allowing for natural sediment transport and natural resource migration. Wanted the ability to regulate future resource areas, as I've sort of touched on. They wanted guidance on the amount of conversion of green space to developed area, and some allowances for restoration projects, and guidance on enforcement. Next. So I'm just going to touch on sort of the high points here, and then we can get into your questions if you have any. But it starts with setting out some general performance standards applicable anywhere within the jurisdictional area, and then there's sort of a breakdown, which I'll get into in a minute. But generally, shall not increase flood elevation or velocity, not increase flows or cause channelization, shall avoid or mitigate adverse flooding effects on nearby properties, ensuring return flow will not be prevented, so to make sure we're not having ponding happen, and preserve existing soils, vegetation, and other natural conditions that serve as buffers to coastal flooding and storm surges. Next. So those are some of the provisions that apply to the entire district. And then the bylaw breaks down some additional provisions that can be applied in the coastal A and V zones, and then the A zones. The coastal A is also known as the moderate wave action area, if you're familiar with that term. That's wave heights between 1.5 and 3 feet. And then the A zones is the sort of the below that, below 1.5. And then there's a sub area that we've identified as the coastal resilience zone. So I have an illustration to help you understand all of these as well. And here it is. So that gray area, the odd shape here, just sort of attempting to represent the variation in our coastal resource areas. The gray area is the area that is typically your typical area of jurisdiction for land subject to coastal storm flowage. The sort of upper boundary of that gray area being really the FEMA extent, the firm maps extents. And you've got beach in there, dunes, salt marsh, various other resources. And then the dotted line represents the extent of the new jurisdictional area that is established by adopting this new model that projects future flood anticipated under certain climate scenarios. So the model, I hope I have a slide on the model, is called the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model, or the MCFRM. Why don't you go to the next slide? And I have it illustrated in a couple of slides. So
jump ahead to it if I find it?
yeah, go ahead 2 slides actually. Yeah, okay. So one of the tools that we built in order to help people understand this was a viewer that's available on the Cape Cod Commission website now. And it shows what you see here, the existing FEMA flood maps. So you see in the green, the velocity zone, in the blue, the coastal A zone, and the light blue, the non-coastal A zone, the lower wave height areas. And then we've also identified the buildings by their vulnerability with different colors as they are affected by those different map designations. So if you go to the next slide, it shows the extents projected under the MCFRM, which is this Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model. It is a model that the state developed to help with planning for future flooding, initially meant to help Mass Department of Transportation with transportation planning and making sure that our transportation assets, roads and bridges, will be resilient. But it is absolutely applicable to planning within any area that's affected by coastal flooding, specifically coastal flooding, not precipitation related. And so what you see here in the dark blue are the areas that the MCFRM anticipates flooding would extend to by 2050, and then the light blue is a little bit further by 2070. And this is a section of Mashpee that unfortunately I'm not familiar with, but you've got Musket Lane and Treasure Lane and the Pirates area.
Pirates Cove.
Is it called Pirates Cove? Okay. So if you go back one, this is the FEMA floodplain, and then you go to the next, you'll see the extent that the MCFRM really projects how much new structures would be, how many new structures would be impacted not that far away from now. You know, this is 2050, this is 25 years. And really, it behooves us all to be thinking about the impacts to these structures. Now, you know, 25 years is, you know, less than the length of many mortgages. The next slide, since we're just on this viewer, is an additional feature of this viewer that shows the elevation of flooding, and just an additional tool to help with planning purposes. So now if you'll just go back a couple, and we'll just touch on the communications toolkit. So as I mentioned before, I've just sort of touched on the highlights that the bylaw and the regulations allow you to regulate to, you know, building heights, what kinds of structures are going to happen within this jurisdictional area, removing structures before storm events, what kinds of accessory structures, how much impervious area, all of those kinds of things. And the bylaws and regulations provide a menu of options for you to sort of select from, because again, as I noted earlier, we recognize that towns are different across the Cape, and they may have different you know, feelings around how far they want to go in regulating development in these areas. So also recognizing that these conversations are difficult, and especially when you're talking about new jurisdictional areas, we have developed a communications toolkit. Because we were working with 5 towns, we sort of made a customized one to each of those communities, but really they are very translatable to any of our communities with, you know, just some adjustments. If you go to the next slide, they include key term definitions, communication best practices. Really, those key terms actually are, you know, sort of provide some layman's language to help translate some of these concepts to the community in a way that is easier to take in and digest. Communication best practices, how to present information, some town-specific data and information, again, to the communities that we were working with directly under that grant, and talking points, but all of it very translatable to any of our communities. So I think that wraps up our presentation, and we're happy to have take any questions or discuss, or however you like to proceed.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot there. I'll go to commissioners first if there's questions, either those that are online or here with us. Any questions or comments?
When do you plan to have some of this information for different commissions like ourselves to presentate?
It's all available now on the Cape Cod Commission website. We just wrapped up the this second grant at the end of June, and it's all been posted on our regulatory tools for development in the floodplain page. So if we can provide a link to Drew later, but if you just Google Cape Cod Commission regulatory tools floodplain, you'll get there.
There's also a link at the end of the presentation here.
Yeah, right. So in that PDF, that might work for you. It should work.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a comment?
Absolutely, Marjorie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Heather and company, that was terrific. I really appreciated what you brought to us, and I wonder if I wouldn't want to inundate you, but would someone be available like yourself, or I know you get probably asked by more than you can accommodate, to come to smaller meetings, gatherings, of communities that want to learn more about this, and your expertise certainly exceeds mine on this particular issue. Do you make that available to smaller groups?
Yes.
Other than the Great Cape, yeah?
Yeah, we can do that. We anticipate that this work will need some assistance from us, and actually also from our colleague Shannon Hulst, who we worked with closely on this. She's really the county's floodplain specialist. So she was an integral part of the development of this work, and she and/or we are planning on making ourselves available for just those kinds of smaller discussions.
That's great to hear. Thanks very much for tonight.
Yep.
Thank you, Marjorie. Anyone else? Sarah?
I have a couple questions. Yeah, hi, Heather.
Hi.
Nice to meet you in person, Michelle. Nice
Likewise.
to meet you as well. Thank you for this. I think this is incredibly relevant. One of the things that comes to my mind with the applications that we see across our desk is that it seems to me in order to utilize a lot of these resources, we're going to need to walk hand in hand with the building department here in town. We hear a lot of applications are compliant with current building codes. And then I think our purview, as I understand it, is to construct performance standards that are going to impact some of the specifics that you mentioned. So impacts of concern like channelization or increasing flows, some of those things. And so I wonder if you have any resources for us and for applicants that maybe the engineers that are preparing these plans can reference in their narrative, just so that we can, maybe it's this model that we have, but so that they can reference and give us a reference point for generating performance standards and also adjudicating the applications, what the risks are to the water flow in the floodplain, and then how. I really appreciate it also. I did some notes just for my own homework later, but thinking about how we can monitor the percentage of undeveloped land so that we can monitor that conversion rate as far as how it's impacting suitable areas for that natural resource migration, or kind of the cumulative impacts that we're tasked with keeping an eye on. So I would love to hear if there are any other resources that we can have specifically that we can share with community members on some of those particular impacts with water flow, because I just, and I'm the new kid here, one of them, Rich, shout out to the newer kid, but you know, I don't often see those in the applications, and I would love to see us having a conversation with applicants about how what they're proposing is going to impact the water flow.
Right. So I don't know if, Michelle, if you have any thoughts on this, but I think that, again, Shannon Hulst she works on these issues much more closely than we do on a regular basis. She works closely with building departments and building commissioners as well. Also, in her office, Cooperative Extension / WHOEC grant, is the county's coastal geologist, who I think would actually be helpful in that regard as well. So, yeah, I think what we anticipate is that commissions may very well need assistance, maybe a third independent sort of review of applications to help better understand, you know, some of the engineering around these, you know, proposals that come forward. Because, yeah, channelization, even ponding, berms, it's hard to know what might happen. So, yeah, that's an area for more work.
Great. I don't think any of us are coastal geologists. I'm certainly not, but that would be an interesting thing for us to discuss.
Yeah, the longtime county geologist Greg Berman now works for the town of Chatham. They recently hired a guy named Brian McCormack. He's very knowledgeable as well. So, and he's been on board for a couple months now. I think he's probably not entirely up to speed, but he has a lot of experience that he can bring to the table. Yeah.
Thank you. I think the only other question that I have is if the coastal resiliency zone would equate to, we have 2 existing buffer zones that are of import. Would that be similar? We would just term them differently?
I believe it's acting as a buffer zone concept, correct?
It really acts as a buffer zone concept, and I think, yeah, so what I noticed from your draft regulations, I didn't say maybe to the group, but I mentioned to your chair that we did review them, so we had an idea what you're talking about. As I understand those, you're creating a 150-foot buffer area that's uniform for the most part. Is that?
And the question is if that is appropriate or if it would shift based on.
And so what the MCFRM does is, I was trying to, there used to be a great fact sheet about how the MCFRM was developed. And
We might still have that.
yeah, if you can find it, I was looking for it. It would really, I think, help you understand all of the inputs into that model and why the state thinks it is a good thing to be working with. But the point being that they incorporated historic storm tracks, tropical storms, sea level rise, wave and current action, as well as coastal geology into this model, which is fairly finely tuned to make these projections that you saw in those examples that we toggled between, so that it's not a uniform distance. It really, the new areas of flooding are related to, where our storms are coming from, prevailing winds, the coastal geography, surface cover, exactly, elevation, all of that. So it becomes a finer tuned tool. However, I will say, everybody says, cautions with models. It's a model. It's not perfect, right? But it might, I think, it went through an extensive vetting process at the state when it was developed. A lot of people contributed to it, bringing a lot of expertise. So I think a lot of people feel comfortable that it's a really good thing to be using for now.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, is there any questions you would like to ask?
I would just say that maybe we can put the link to this tool on our website, on the Conservation Commission website, because it's really hard to find it simply going to the Cape Cod Commission's website, because there's a lot of places intuitively you would think that it might live, and it was really hard for me to bumble around until I found the link on the slides. So
Alex, you don't
Fair.
fumble any.
I did.
You're not a fumbler.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, yeah, our website just has too much content on it, so it's
A lot.
yeah, it's hard to navigate there. We'll share that also with Drew.
Okay. Anything else, Alex?
No, I just feel like we should be consulting this as we look at projects anyway. It's so helpful. It definitely, it fills the gaps that the FEMA maps leave for us. It definitely feels really helpful looking at it.
Okay, thank you. Rich, any questions or comments?
Yeah, if I could just say thank you for presenting that. I'm very new to the commission, and I certainly have a lot to learn, and I'm learning as I go, but for me, it was very informative, and I do appreciate you coming in and presenting that.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. I have a couple of questions that I'd like to present. I went ahead and I took the presentation the other day and went over to your site and started looking. And I pulled up the document that you highlighted in the presentation, which is the higher standards levels. And something that caught my eye in that was number 3, warning and disclaimer of liability. I don't know if you're familiar with that whole document, but it knocks on the door of the degree of flood protection and the resilience design that a particular municipality would argue for. And what legal aspects are involved with the municipality in terms of the amount of damage and destruction that would be incurred if an applicant followed the guidelines, the performance standards that are being laid out in a certain town. And it seemed to be a disclaimer, you know, it's insert name of the town here, any officer or employee thereof for any flood damage may result from reliance on these regulations. Is that something that one of the particular towns that you work for asked to be part of that, or is that something that an attorney from Cape Cod Commission suggested? Or I was just curious as to, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but.
Yeah, so I didn't read the zoning regulations before, the zoning bylaw before I came, actually, so I'm a little fuzzy on this, but I will tell you that our team included the Urban Harbors Institute, which is an institute of UMass Boston, and attorneys with the firm Noble, Wickersham and Hart. And it was an attorney who really drafted these, 2 attorneys who drafted these regulations. And they've done extensive work in other areas on floodplain regulations. So I am just going to inadvisably speculate that that was something that they thought was a good thing to include. The way we structured these model bylaws, again, is sort of a menu of things that the community can pick and choose from. We like having these models out there because structurally, if our communities, many of them, adopt a similar model, you know, then there's more familiarity across the Cape with, you know, a certain set of regulations. But as I've noted, the models allow for communities to customize it to some extent. And then also, in addition to answering Sarah's question about would we be available to help, you know, with you know, questions on this, we anticipate your town council would, you know, need to be involved in fine-tuning it to make it work within the existing framework of Mashpee's bylaws.
The reason I asked, I know when we started working on our drafts, Drew had provided a document, and it was called No Adverse Impact Legal Guide for Flood Risk Management, volume 23.06. And I remember Drew saying, you guys might want to take a look at this. It's 375 pages of armchair reading for a night, and I just kind of looked and said, oh my God. But I did look at it, and I came across a law professor in that guide by the name of Maxine Burkick. And she had a white paper, and it was entitled Duty and Breach in an Era of Uncertainty, Local Government Liability for Failure to Adapt to Climate Change. And I read that. It's about a 27, 28-page article. It's quite interesting. I mean, it's basically the opposite. So it's kind of like if you make some strict standards and somebody follows them and they still incur a lot of loss, is the municipality liable? And if you don't, is the municipality liable? Because that's the point that that law professor was arguing. You know, you have a duty as a town official that if you know there's an inherent danger coming and you don't prepare the community to live within that danger, you're negligent there. So it's kind of like, you know, win-lose.
Yeah, right.
So I was wondering if something like that may have influenced that point number 3 that was in those higher standards.
I can't speak to that
Yeah.
exactly. other than to say that this team worked on floodplain bylaws for the city of Boston also.
Right. And one last question, the higher standard document, and a lot of what you've shown here tonight, this was all compiled before the DEP draft regulations, during or after, or at what is the historical?
Yeah, great question.
Because the higher one says 2024, so that's obviously after.
Right. We had this good idea before they started on their effort. Yeah, I'm being a little facetious here, but no, as I said, we heard clearly from many communities that they were concerned about this, and we started this work. We submitted this grant proposal and started this work, and within like 3 months of having started the work, we heard that DEP was thinking about coming out with their own regulations for LSCSF, finally after like 20 years of not. And we're like, really? Okay. But fortunately, again, our one of the attorneys on the team has a contact in DEP who was also working on those regulations, and they were very generous in sharing information with us. So we felt that as we worked on first the bylaw and later the regulations, that we had designed something that was aligned with DEP's, what DEP we anticipated would issue for comment, yeah, which was in fact the case. So they are very well coordinated, meaning our model is very well coordinated with DEP's initial draft that we all saw a year or so ago. And what happens next with that is, unknown. I mean, they may promulgate something or they may not. So I feel like, we're in a position as a Cape community where some of the most vulnerable in Massachusetts, and we can even make some baby steps forward on this. The MCFRM has 3 flood projections. The first is 2030, which is just a few years away. The next is 2050. That was that dark blue area that you saw. And then 2070.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 2030 isn't even on here because I think we're not thinking that there's a lot of value in thinking about 2030, but if that feels like that initial step is the one that can sort of get your foot in the door, as it were, with the community, then maybe that's a place to start.
Yeah, yeah. I tend to...
I have one other thought, Paul.
Yes.
I guess I would just be curious, Heather, if you feel that the way your bylaws, recommendations, and the menu of things is written, if whether or not they incentivize creativity for homeowners and solutions we might not even know yet, because that's something that has come up a couple times. It's a really great point, I think, especially for our town, that just incentivizing homeowners to be creative.
That's a great question. I would like to think that it does do that, because while we wanted to be responsive to the town's requests to provide more detail about, specific things like what to do with fences and patios and stairs and things like that, I think it's also relatively spare in detail, so that often leaves room for some flexibility. But I'd like to actually go back and look at it with that question in mind and sort of think that through. And frankly, you all have the experience seeing the actual projects at the, parcel by parcel level that we don't see at the regional level. So you are seeing the proposals and having to wrestle with these kinds of unique situations that we don't. And so, your feedback would really be valuable. We've established this version as a final version, but I anticipate it will get modified. Yeah.
And if I may add to that, I'd just like to offer also, regulations don't just prohibit things, they do allow for work in these areas that meet certain standards. And so to the extent that there are allowances for work within these areas, I do believe that there is opportunity for homeowners or property owners to be creative in how they're proposing to do that work, yet still be consistent with the standards. So I do think that there is some opportunity there for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Drew or Dan, questions or comments?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming and taking the time to present to the commission. It's really great information, and I know we're going to, through our commission and our bylaw review subcommittee, take full advantage of this information and use it to, continue with our revisions to our regulation. First question is, do you know of any other towns that have adopted any bylaw regulations for the flood zone under their conservation commissions?
Chatham,
has.
yeah, and Wellfleet.
Okay.
Wellfleet is it's not just floodplain. Theirs is called like a coastal resiliency bylaw, which ours is too. But yeah, Wellfleet is trying to move a little bit more aggressively about managing development.
It'd be good for all towns to look at creating a flood zone regulation under their bylaw, at least the towns that have a bylaw, in place. I just wanted to get your thoughts, when you mentioned DEP going through their current revisions, they don't have any buffer zone proposed as part of their revisions. What are your thoughts on that?
I guess, what are my thoughts on that? I guess what I saw in what was proposed is that this is 1.0 and they're hoping to quickly move on 2.0. So I guess I was thinking that they too are making a move that feels politically viable at this time, and then we'll make the next step when they, the dust has settled.
Dust in the waters.
Yeah.
Baby steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. In your presentation, one of the slides talked about resource area migration and allowing migration landward. Are there any examples that you can that you're familiar with where that has been feasible? Because we all know that development near the coast is probably the heaviest as it is compared to inland areas. So, just from a feasibility standpoint, what would that look like if you've got a coastline that's lined with homes and yards and, or seawalls or things like that? How would that, what are the ideas, I guess, that could make that kind of allowance feasible?
Yeah, I think that where you've got sort of heavily revetted coastlines, there may not be a lot of migration that's really viable. But I think what we imagined and have seen sort of at the desktop scale and on the ground, certainly, is that there are areas that are where the elevation changes are very gradual. And where you may have salt marsh and upland beyond, and it's feasible that as sea level rises, if it doesn't go too quickly and the salt marsh can keep up, that it will actually migrate landward. And we know that there are scientists here at MBL and Woods Hole Oceanographic that are interested in this topic as well and looking at it. And APCC is actually in the middle of a project on this in this area as well. So I think there are so many potentials to that question. It's sort of hard to get at, but I think that we anticipate that areas that aren't already heavily developed with revetments and seawalls is really the areas where this is going to be most meaningful.
Sure, no, absolutely. And one of the things that, our bylaw puts a heavy emphasis on is the preservation or enhancement or even creation in the absence of a naturally vegetated buffer strip between developed portions of lots and the resource areas. The only way that we can realistically, get something like that in return is when somebody comes in with an application for a proposal.
Yeah.
You can't, it's not, the Wetlands Protection Act, as you know, is not retroactive to those grandfathered situations in the absence of a known violation, where you can prove that somebody has committed a violation as opposed to that existing condition prior to 1978 or mid-90s when the bylaw came about for Mashpee.
Right.
So that is something that we, when the topic of creativity was brought up, that, if you, and this is just my own personal opinion, if you're looking to, create real and meaningful change on a lot that says, that basically is comprised of high-maintenance lawn going right up to the edge of BVW or salt marsh, you can't change that condition in the absence of somebody coming in and saying, I want to create a 3-season sunroom. I want a
Right.
patio. I want a deck. I want a home addition, these sorts
Right.
of things. So in that sort of situation, you can get something, if you're the Concom, in exchange for what is reasonable from the homeowner. And I believe that's really one of the more effective ways to actually create and enhance naturally vegetated buffer strips where they are absent, because they are absent quite a bit in many coastal areas. So just to bring that up as, as a, just an opinion of mine that, in the absence of permitting, you can't do that unless it's a known violation. So there
Right.
has to be some sort of balance in exchange, but it has to be reasonable
Right.
for both sides. Just a couple of other questions. You mentioned the state mapping for these, for this map. What agency was it that assisted the state in creating these maps? Was it Coastal Zone Management or?
So coastal zone management staff were involved. It was EEA. I don't know if they were. I was going to say led. So Mass DOT, Department of Transportation, was the entity that actually contracted the work, but there were multiple state agencies involved, including CCM staff.
Sure.
And DEP, I'm sure. And then there were also academics involved. And then ultimately it was the Woods Hole Group who built the thing.
Okay. Last question is, one of the slides had mentioned, giving, providing guidance on enforcement. Can you expand on that as far as like any ideas that have been tossed about as far as, feasible enforcement for such a wide-ranging area?
Yeah, as I was reading that, I was like, did we do much on that?
Much is perhaps a loose term here. We gave a lot of deference to municipalities to be able to incorporate things that they felt would be good actions for enforcement. There's some considerations there that municipalities could think of in terms of enforcement. I wouldn't say that we outlined specific items that a town could use for enforcement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, it really comes down to if you have enough personnel, because it is such a broad-ranging area. And believe me, I'm, all in favor of, increased jurisdiction and enforcement as long as it's feasible. Because when you have regulations that are unenforceable, they become paper tigers, and it's kind of pointless, in my opinion. But it all comes down to resources and staffing, I would imagine would be the #1 criterion when it comes to enforceability of any, type of regulation, whether it's flood zone or otherwise. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Great. Dan, anything?
Yeah, when it comes to the coastal resilience zone, is there a set of performance standards or anything you would have already available for people to review? Because I know when it comes to that zone, or as you've heard here, the buffer zone for Mashpee, that it's, you know, it's one of those things that they're worried about performance standards, and they're also worried about whether they have to file an RDA, whether they have to file a notice of intent, or if they have to file it all, quite frankly. So I don't know if there's any draft performance standards or recommendations, I guess I should say,
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah, there are. So we'll provide a link, a direct link to the website, which is that one that's on the end of this presentation. And if it's live in the PDF, you can just click on it. There is the what is called the Coastal Resiliency Bylaw. That was the first effort. And then the draft Coastal Resiliency Regulations, which do have the performance standards associated.
All right,
in them.
excellent.
Yeah, I just didn't get into the details here because
No, I just
would
wanted to
have
make
been
sure
weighty.
that'll be a very helpful tool, especially for this commission with drafting the, you know, Regulation 25, as we call it.
Yep.
So, and also when it comes to the projections, when it comes to like a 2030 projection or a 2050 projection, is there any plans, not by Cape Cod Commission or anything, but by CZM or anyone who made the projection maps to revisit that? So say you get to 2030 and it's less, or say the 2030 and it's more, is there any idea or concept to revisit that so they could adjust the projections for 2050 or whatnot?
I haven't heard that specifically, but I can't imagine that they wouldn't. And specifically, I was just on a webinar recently led by EEA where they are looking at adding the impacts of precipitation to this. So that is a key element that this does not include, and they have funding to add that element. So I can only imagine that, I don't know how long that's going to take,
Yeah.
honestly, right? That's complicated. But so perhaps through that effort, there will be a revisit of this as well.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine 2030, but I would think 2050 they could be,
Yeah.
you know, more than ready for it at that point.
Right.
So that's all. Yeah, and then with all these regulations and drafts and recommendations going in place, not just with the flood zone, but with anything, is there any consideration for incentivizing the residents of towns to be part of the cleanup effort or to be part of improving all of these things? Because I see a lot of regulations go into place in Mashpee and Katuitt, or not Katuitt, and Barnstable, or wherever it may be, and especially in the Cape with these, you know, the green watersheds and all that, that there's no incentives for the residents to want to file a permit. And I run into situations here where I explain to them the process, what they have to do, and what they can kind of hope for at the max to the minimum. And sometimes they're like, you know what, I'm just all set. And then it stinks sometimes because it's a prime property that is coastal real estate, and I leave that meeting sometimes feeling like but as conservation, we're at a loss because we have the opportunity to create a naturally vegetated buffer strip or reinforce the bank that is failing or whatnot, whatever it may be. So is there any incentives being looked at, whether it's to, you know, clean the groundwater, include groundwater as an actual resource that can be targeted for people to clean, because this technology is out there now, but also there's people that want to be a part of it but have no direction on how to be a part of it. So.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And in this area, I'm not sure that I have any great ideas. I would love to hear them, any that you might have. I will say that a separate project that we're working on at the present time is our freshwater initiative, looking at ponds and strategies for pond management. And we've just issued a contract to Crawford Land Management to help us develop a pond buffer restoration guide book. So it will get at, I hope, some of these things that you're raising for ponds specifically. And related to that, what we heard from stakeholders, including conservation departments, associated with the freshwater work, was basically the same thing. You know, how can we encourage people to do the right thing to within pond buffers, and maybe revisit or examine existing regulations and see if there are ways to streamline the regulatory process to reduce some of the barriers that result in this sort of experience. People just being like, forget it.
Yeah, especially when it comes down to cost of contractors. That's always the biggest takeaway, so.
Yeah.
So I just want to throw out, just for the sake of dialogue and back and forth, I know like the city of Fort Collins has a program where they incentivize homeowners to plant native plants, and they pay them to do so. And it's very successful, and it has turned around the city. I've also been at a property in Maine that was a little cabin on the lake that had a plaque on the driveway that was given to the property owner by the town saying like exemplary or exceptional waterfront owner. So what they did was every year they gave a property owner whose property was what you would want to see with a native buffer, like an award for the status of the state of their property. And it was just something to make people feel good about it for doing the right thing, because we don't do anything like that.
Right.
So just some thoughts. We don't have to create the wheel. You can just like lift it from other people.
Right. No, exactly right. We heard that similar comment through our freshwater initiative too. There are various programs that are, basically sort of create awards or recognition of people who are doing the right thing. And people respond to that.
Yep.
Definitely.
Good motivator.
Yep.
Yep.
Good stuff.
Okay, anybody from the public? There were a few people there, but they stepped out. No one else? We're good? Well, Heather, Michelle, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Very timely for us, because we're in the middle of revising regulations for floodplain, so we'll certainly be poring over what you have here.
Well, thank you very much. We're very glad to have been invited and to have this conversation with you. And yeah, we have some stuff to take back too, so it's good.
Thank you
Great,
very
we'll
much.
be in touch, for sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I know when I went through the draft agenda, I didn't pick up on this typo, but I've seen it now, so I do have to comment on it. Sure. Our next agenda is to schedule the execution session. And we're not going to do that. It should say executive. I missed it, but I saw it today and I went, ooh, that's a slip. But anyways, we do have in mind to be meeting with legal counsel for the appeal of 425 Monomoskoye Road. As you recall, that project was denied, and we gave our rationale, and the DEP came out and had a site visit. So we really think it's prudent that we sit down and meet. We were looking at September 12th, I believe, Drew. Was that the target date that we had thought would be the best?
Council had asked if August 22nd was possible, and I didn't think it was enough lead time to get full attendance, because full attendance for executive session is always heavily encouraged.
Yeah.
And plus August 22nd is a really loaded agenda. So to start at 5 o'clock and then move into a 6:30 agenda with almost 8 hearings or 9 hearings is an exceptionally long evening. So that's why we looked at September 12th as a more realistic at 5 p.m.
5 p.m. startup time.
We had exec session.
That would give us an hour and a half.
And just so you know, the attorney hasn't confirmed his availability for that date. So, but I
Okay.
did say that August 22nd was kind of,
It's on top of us.
Plus, we're in a stretch of 3 meetings in a row, and so I understand,
agree.
That's a lot to ask for volunteers. So, so we'll that's the recommendation currently is September 12th. He acknowledged he's going to see if he's got like another meeting. He might be able to find a substitute for that conflicts currently with September 12th. So at least that's what's on the table now.
So for the commissioners that are here tonight, is September 12th an issue on your calendars, or can we proceed with that as a target date? Does that sound viable to everybody?
Yeah, that's fine.
And there would be a Zoom component.
Sounds good to me.
have a Zoom component as well, yeah, because 5 o'clock can be tough. Okay, why don't we do that, and we should probably bring that up again on next
22nd.
Thursday night's meeting.
Yeah, we'll just have that, have it as a
Because
reminder.
Sandy's missing, and who else is missing? That's it,
That's it? Sandy?
just Sandy.
Yeah.
No,
Seems like
1,
someone else,
2,
but it's not.
3,
No, everyone's gone now.
But-
5,
Aaron's
6,
not, yeah,
Three.
That's what
or
it is.
5. Right, we don't have a commissioner.
Yeah, that's right.
Wait, are you ignoring me?
No, I'm looking right at you.
We see you.
Okay, then, let's
This is just
go.
about September, right?
Yeah, September 12th, Marjorie.
Yeah, I'm in,
We're
I'm
gonna,
on.
we'll target
There.
that for, assuming that it's okay with the attorney.
Yep.
Right. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, moving right along. Our next agenda item is for the endorsement of Conservation Commissioner Member-at-Large Rich Shaw. And we have this down as a vote. So I guess what I'd like to do is open it up to Richard first. If you'd like to address the commission on your eagerness to jump on.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I know I've only been here, this is my 4th or 5th meeting, I think, and I've certainly learned a lot to this date. I know I have a lot more to learn, but I certainly look forward to working with the commission in the future, and I'm crazy to say, I have enjoyed it, so I am looking forward to it.
We didn't scare him away. It's amazing.
You're a glutton for punishment.
I'll take it.
Sure. Would anybody like to ask Rich any questions?
No, I think Rich has, performed as an associate member very well in the last several meetings and
This one,
answered some good questions and asked some good questions, I mean.
Yep.
So, I think to have him at, full-time member would be great. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Anyone else?
Sounds good to me.
Marjorie, Alex, anything? Sarah?
Maybe, Rich, I could just eyeball to eyeball ask if you feel there would be any conflict with being a waterfront resident or, working on new construction for electrician in terms of voting on permit applications, if there would be any conflict in erring on the side of conservation.
I don't have a problem. I think during the course of my 2 interviews, I kind of explained why I kind of jumped into this. I think living on the water, granted I've only been here since 19, gives me maybe a perspective that maybe other people don't have. So I think that's important. As far as my electrical business, the builders that I do work for, when they get to a point where they've already have permits in place, like I don't have builders that say to me, like, hey, I've got a project coming up in another 6 months or a year. I don't know about it until they actually have it permitted. So obviously, if I find out that there's something that I might be involved with, and I've stated before, I'll step away from that. But most of the time, when I do get called by a builder or a homeowner or whoever it is, like, the permitting process is well in place. And my opinion or how I, decide to take it has really no bearing on the conservation end of it. Because like I said, by the time it gets to me, it's already been approved. Mm-hmm. But like I said, if there is a project that I know is coming and there's a vote on it, I will step away from it. I've said that before, and I have no problem doing it.
Sure, thank you. And I'm not part of those circles or conversations, so I just wanted to check in and see. But it is great having your perspective here, and I think you're right. I don't live on the water, so I don't know what that's like.
I guess the only question I would have, and it's really not a question for you, Richard, it's a procedural question. I know Sarah's new, and you're new, and I know we all take the conflict of interest training online, and I believe we're supposed to have that every year, right? We take it online, we sign off, we get a certificate, it goes to the town clerk. Have the new members taken that course?
It comes from HR, so we
Yeah,
get it from HR, and then we disperse it out to the commissioners.
So that should be coming out relatively
Yeah,
soon.
it's usually around February of each year from my recollection. Yeah.
And if I could add to that, Mr. Commissioner,
Yes,
with the fire department, we do have those types of things that we have to fill out, and I'm not sure if it's the same form statewide, but we have to do that conflict of interest training every year, so I can certainly look into it, but I have no problem signing it. But if it's the same training that I do, I can surely provide documentation to that.
Right. I'm just, in my mind, I'm contemplating we would have 2 voting commissioners that have yet to take a conflict of interest training and have a certificate in place, which kind of is,
I believe you can also follow up on your own with the State Ethics Commission and
And
take the
just do it?
exam anytime you wish.
Yeah,
rather
you
than
can.
waiting for the HR to do it.
yeah,
And sometimes, just like any other department, HR might get backed up and, some
Sure.
things don't get out in a timely fashion. So if, either Sarah or Rich want to take it upon themselves to take the exam through the website and then provide the results to HR or to us, and we can send it to HR, that's fine too.
okay.
Could you send us that link,
Yeah.
just so we could find the exam? That'd be great.
Yeah, it shouldn't be too hard to come up with.
Be happy to.
Okay.
Paul, I
Yes.
do have one question for Rich.
Sure,
I guess
go ahead.
Rich, I'm curious, do you, or I guess has your time serving so far helped shape your beliefs around climate change at all?
Well, I do believe in, there is climate change. I do believe it. And that's kind of one of the reasons I'm here. I think when I had my interview in front of you guys, like I said, I only have a small sample size, but I do see, the tides are, seem to be higher in the short amount of time I'm here.
Yeah.
So, I guess if you're asking me, do I believe in climate change? Of course I do.
Okay. All right. That was my question. Thanks.
Okay, then, no other questions? I would entertain a motion.
Yeah. So move to accept Rich Saul as a member at large.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Motion made. Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you, Sarah. Motion made and seconded to move Rich from associate to member at large. Any further discussion by the commission before I call for a vote? Hearing none, let me go around the table and the screen. Steve?
Yes.
Marjorie?
Yes,
Alex?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Congratulations, Richard.
Thank you.
woo-hoo!
Now I can call on you to vote for every one of these proposals and not skip over you. Because I consistently get somebody in the audience that looks and like, what about this other guy? How come he's not asking for his vote?
What about the guy that looks like a CPA? Why isn't he voting?
CPA, that'd be the first someone has said that.
I know a lot of CPAs. You do look like, it's not pejorative at all. It means smart. You look.
I wish I looked like a CPA.
You could, yeah. With those glasses, you sort of do.
Okay. I'm going to move on to the 2 sets of minutes that we need to work with here because everybody's here that I have on my list. The first set of minutes is September 8th of 2022, goes back a ways. And unfortunately, Marjorie, it's just you and me. We're the only 2 members that were at that meeting. All
I
the rest,
remember it like minute by minute.
yeah, all the rest have passed along off the commission, and so it's down to a quorum of 2. But did you have a chance to look through all of that?
You know what, I'm gonna be very honest with you. It was a while back when someone sent them out to me. I don't know if it was you or Drew.
Right.
But I can't say that I remember them now, right this minute.
So you don't have any objections to the way they were put together and presented?
No, I actually am a big fan of whoever puts them together.
Well, I'm looking right at her. She's over there sitting at that table. And Drew.
Yes, he is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I went through them. I didn't have any objections to what was there. I did not pull up the video and run them side by side, but I did read through it, and I remembered a lot of it, surprisingly.
Yeah.
So I would accept a motion, Marjorie, if you would.
I will, I move to accept the minutes of 9/8/2022.
Thank you, and I would have to second that motion because I'm the only one available to second it, so I'll second it. Would you like to discuss that any further, Marjorie?
I'd like to say it's just a great representation of what commissions should put forward. It's a model.
Okay. I'll take a vote. Marjorie?
Yes,
And I vote yes as well, so those minutes are in. The second set of minutes is for August 11th, same year, 2022. And on this set of minutes, it would be myself and Alex, you're in on this one, and Marjorie. So
There you
have
go.
you had a chance to go through all of that?
It was the same type of thing. I mean, I read it and nothing stood out to me as super wrong.
I didn't see anything glaring in it that I was opposed to. Marjorie, you okay with that set?
I am very much okay, yep.
Okay, I do accept the motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Marjorie. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Alex. Further discussion? Hearing none. Vote. Alex?
Yes, sorry, I
Yes.
muted.
Marjorie?
Yes,
And I vote yes as well. So both those sets of minutes are now into the record.
Real quick,
Yes.
the most recent email that you guys got from me is the most recent draft for the September 8th. And you should have gotten that like within the less than a week. Or
Yes.
whatever. So that, just in case you don't have to go that far back.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Moving on to our discussion agendas. The first one is review permit documents. And we have some samples. I don't know if the remote people have these samples. So do they, Drew, or did you send that out to them?
No, Stacy sent them out.
I did not see any.
Okay.
Okay, so what we have here are some documents that Drew provided that I believe, is this part of Permit Eyes?
Yes. Yeah. And we can send these out to the commissioners online. But this is, because I had mentioned the Permit Eye software at various times in previous meetings, as a way to just assure the commission that when it comes to communication amongst the regulatory boards, this is the software that we've been using over the last couple of years, I think over the last 3 years, where every department is notified from any other department on all cross-jurisdictional projects for the purposes of signing off on building permits. So it doesn't cover, every project that the commission reviews, but any project that involves a building permit, which is certainly the majority of them.
Yep.
This type of software allows us, so for instance, if, for some address on, let's just use Monomoskoye Road is, it's a raise and replace, the commission approved it. They have to go through Board of Health and Zoning, and they've met their conditions, and then we get automatically notified to sign off on the building permit. And the building permit the building department is the last one to sign off. They wait for every other department to sign off. So the first thing that we do when we get that alert is we bring the file up and we check to make sure that all of the conditions in the order of conditions have been met, and if they haven't, they don't get a sign off from us on the building permit, and the building permit doesn't get issued. So that's kind of just a snapshot example of how we have this system of checks and balances to ensure that nobody is going to proceed with their project until all of the conditions are fully met and complied with. And we even have in the beginning of every order condition says a subset that says these order conditions must be complied with before a building permit is signed off on. And then the other conditions are relative to once the project gets started, like erosion control, display of DEP permit number, those sorts of things. So we provided you with an example of one that is probably the most heavily conditioned project that we've issued lately, which was for, as the commissioners recall, 61 Shoestring Bay. That was the construction of a house on an undeveloped lot that was partially over coastal bank. Lots of conditions on that, all certainly warranted. But when you look through, you can just see how comprehensive the order of condition is. Starting with general orders of conditions, a thorough work description, narrative, and plan reference, and then the project description itself. But you can see the very first condition on page A, where it says, please note the following conditions must be fully met prior to commencement of any work or Conservation Department sign off on any other applicable town permits. And these are all bullet pointed below. So this just kind of provides an example of, how thorough the drafting of our order of conditions are based on your comments and based on the resource areas and the performance standards of every resource area that applies to a given property. So we wanted to provide you with this example, and we'll send out other templates that we have for various commonly requested activities, whether it's raise and replace, vista pruning, beach nourishment, water-dependent projects like docks, piers, bulkheads, seawalls, those sorts of things. We have a template created for each one of those activities, and all of the relevant resource areas you would commonly find related to those activities on any given lot. And then we go in and we edit accordingly, based on which of those resource areas exist, which performance standards are most applicable, and then you add in additional standards where you as commissioners have stated as conditions at meetings.
Special conditions,
So
right.
this is good information for you all to look at, and we're wide open to any suggestions. If you see anything in the templates that you may have an issue with, or you may want to enhance or edit, we're happy to do that. But I think it's been a while. We've dispersed these to previous iterations of commissions, and I don't think this current one has gotten that yet. So it's an important thing for you all to see just what we put into the permits when it comes to approvals and conditioning thereof. So like I said, we're welcome to feedback on this. And as you can see, every permit that we issue, every order of conditions, with a few exceptions, are issued under the State Wetlands Protection Act, 310 CMR, and Chapter 172. So when you see the first few pages here, these are all the state DEP conditions, general conditions under Section C. They don't change. They remain the same regardless of whatever project happens to be approved. Our conditions, however, are much more germane to the project, the specific project itself, and the specific setting. So with some rare exceptions, most of our permits are issued under both the state and local bylaw. Like some example that would warrant issuance of a bylaw-only order of conditions would be for, say, a property that's bordering inland bank, because our definition of top of inland bank varies greatly from the state. So depending on where a project is in proximity to top of inland bank, it may fall under only our bylaw jurisdiction and not the state. So we wouldn't issue these first few pages that deal with 310 CMR. We would only issue our local order of conditions. So it's an important thing to understand that not all of our permits are issued under both. Most of them are, but there are some exceptions to that. And I think we need to get into more of the habit of paying attention to that more. It's not that we've been doing anything wrong. If anything, we're overcompensating by including the state, but it's not always applicable to every
It's
situation.
unnecessary work is what it is.
Yes, exactly. So we just wanted to provide you with some examples of how we go about processing the decisions you make when it comes to orders of conditions, which involve, the most work and the most preparation and planning. RDAs are pretty simple because RDAs basically are saying the commission believes this doesn't need to be conditioned, or you can modify them to be conditioned. But for the most part, you're satisfied with the project as presented if you issue a negative determination. You don't require any more information. You don't require any conditions unless otherwise stated. And then, of course, administrative approvals are the lowest level and simplest level of approval. So orders of conditions, amended order of conditions involve the most work, I guess, and specificity, for conditions. So we wanted to share this with you all so you're aware of what the office does after each meeting. And of course, there are specific timelines, as you're all aware of, that we have to get these out within 21 days of issuance. And there's a lot of follow-up, too, that goes along with these permits. So we go out and conduct site visits to make sure these conditions are actually being adhered to. And then, of course, when a project is finished, the applicant is required to file a certificate of compliance. Because what the recording, when we issue an order of conditions, it has to go to the Registry of Deeds for the local county. It has to get recorded. And we need to receive proof of that recording to make it a legally binding document, to make it legally enforceable. Any permit that isn't recorded, the work should never take place. So that's one of the things that we vet out when we get a request for a building permit. Have you recorded the order of conditions? Do we have proof of that recording? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So when you guys approve something, that's where the real work begins when it comes to regulatory enforcement of these conditions. And that last step, a certificate of compliance, well, that's the catch-all. So if something is done that greatly varies from what you saw and approved on the official plan of record, they don't get a certificate of compliance. And when they record the order of conditions, it places a lien on the deed. So if they want to transfer their house, their property, or sell it, they can't until they get a certificate of compliance, because that gets recorded, and that process removes the lien that was placed on the deed from the recording of the permit. So it's a very involved process. There's a lot of work involved in making sure that there's compliance with the orders. And, explaining this process to the homeowner when most of them have representation here to handle these processes can be challenging because most of the time they're not even aware of it. They hire somebody to take it.
Sure, they don't.
And so sometimes it involves a lot of re-education.
Yeah.
Or re-information about the process. And one of the things that we're thinking of doing, and we will do ultimately, is creating a pamphlet to kind of break this down into a flow chart for the homeowner to make it very easily understood. Because translating this information to the homeowner is extremely challenging. They usually, like I said, most of them are represented by engineers and consultants. And then there's a gap in communication there between the entities. Once they move out of here, they're on to the next client. They don't follow up with their existing client. We do.
Right.
So there's a lot involved. We're able to do it. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of time, but it's worth it just to ensure that things are done the right way. So we just want to ensure you that there is a process in place for that. And more often than not, compliance is ultimately achieved.
Yeah.
But it is a lot of follow-up.
I have a quick question.
Can I just make a, I guess, quick anecdote about time? I guess I would ask if we could all mull this over. I don't expect a vote or a change made tonight. But if we could mull over the idea, I would almost say going entirely to Zoom for our meetings where we deal with applications, and then maybe we meet in person quarterly for these meetings so that we're still in the same room and getting to feel the energy, so to speak. But I think, when you look back to the COVID era, I was looking back to some of those meetings, we did get through 10 permits in a night and it didn't take 4 hours. The time that our meetings is taking is not sustainable for us as commissioners. I don't think it's sustainable for staff. I don't think it's good for staff. I would really ask that we consider that because right now, I can't see any of you. If you were all on Zoom, I could see you, I could see your reactions. We could have seen the presentation up and seen each other at the same time. And there are other towns that do it. And it would affect, I think, more people than just us. It would be easier for applicants. It would be easier for engineers. We wouldn't be trailblazing that. There are other people that do it. So I ask that you mull it over, and maybe we can bring it up again in the future as a serious consideration, because I am so ready to quit if the meetings continue going till 10 p.m. I cannot do it. It hurts my body. It hurts my head. I'm not interested in it. So that's my pitch.
Okay.
Thank you.
A question I would have on that, Alex.
It's well worth consideration.
Yeah. Is that something that we could do, or do we have to have an in-person component? Once the COVID thing was lifted.
I'm pretty sure you can do it. It all comes down to the governor's decision about how long he wants to extend this form of open meeting format remotely. So it's not forever. There is a limit. Maybe it will be forever, hopefully, because I think it's extremely convenient.
It would be, yeah.
But right now, it's not a forever thing. It's ultimately up
I
to
believe
discretion
it's
of
May
the
of
governor.
'25.
What's that?
May
Yeah,
of '25
correct.
was the
Yeah.
extended format.
So whatever the state decides, that's what the towns have to adhere to, as far as the open meeting law goes. So it remains to be seen, but I agree. I think it would be a more efficient format, and there will be less absenteeism, in general. And not to say that absenteeism isn't justified, but it would offer another way to attend a meeting if you have something else going on where you couldn't attend in person. So
Okay.
certainly worthy,
We should mull it over then.
alternative.
Yeah,
Yeah.
mull it over and
One thing along those lines, now that Alex brought it up, is that one of the suggestions that I was thinking about is when it comes to public comment, the select board limits them to 3 minutes.
To
I
3
think we
minutes.
need to establish a limit when it comes to public comment.
Okay.
Whether it's a butters or general public comment, let's establish a time limit, because I've seen some of these folks get up, and I'm not dismissing their concerns, but a lot of it is repetitive.
Yeah,
A lot of it
just
is
go on and on.
not your purview, and they just go on and on and on, and there's nobody is saying anything about anything. It just, there's no limit. And that does add significant time to a meeting. So I think establishing a time limit that's reasonable would be a good idea.
I think we should put that on our next agenda. I believe that that would really be a wonderful job for the clerk,
Yes.
be the timekeeper.
Yeah.
And, they can do that on
Yeah,
their
exactly.
phone or anywhere, just
Yeah.
set Siri on the phone and it's gonna set the alarm off.
Yeah.
And, like the select board does, we'd give them, 10 or 12 or 20 seconds to wrap it up, and then second time, goodbye.
So we can add that to our next meeting as an agenda item, as well as, starting a discussion on 2025 as far as frequency of meetings and start time. As we mulled about, every 3 weeks as opposed to every 2 weeks, and then changing the start time to an earlier start time than 6:30.
Right.
So maybe all of those things can be kind of one general discussion item for.
Thank you,
And I don't think we can do earlier if it's not on Zoom. Because realistically, people need to eat dinner. And I really think it would be better, for Drew and Dan, for you guys to be able to get home and then take these meetings from home. Like, I don't know. I really encourage you to think about it, because I would like to see you guys still in person. I think there's a valuable component to that, but maybe that's our quarterly meeting.
Yeah,
That could
well, that's,
be,
we can
yeah.
add this to, like, an overall discussion at a future meeting, whether it's August 22nd or September. We'll put it on the next agenda.
Okay, but before we go too far, Alex, I like and endorse your idea. I wanted to just ask one question of Drew back on permitize. I didn't know we had moved on. Can I ask you one question on that, Drew?
Sure.
Yeah, which I think will also cut back on time. I think you guys do a great job of moving along an awful lot of material, et cetera, et cetera. But as commissioners, do we have access to permitize? In other words, can we get in and say, oh, I forget what that thing was on Monomoskoye?
Oh, yeah, it's a publicly accessible software. So
For
it allows,
okay.
for at least for the building department, and I believe for zoning and Board of Health, you can use Permitize to submit your permit applications. The only reason you can't do that with conservation is because DEP has their own software. It's called eDEP, and they are proprietary, and they won't allow any other form of software to be incorporated, for their software to be incorporated into, which is a shame. It would be really helpful if we could have online permitting on the local level through Permitize, but that's kind of a snafu that we hit with DEP, and we're not the only town, in that same situation. It would be much more efficient if we could process our permits through Permitize, but unfortunately DEP is not willing to share their software, so we are forced to use it. So, yeah, that's.
Well, then, but what you had reviewed for us is up on the Permitize website,
It
yes?
absolutely is, yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
and if I want to go up, or if one of my neighbors says, hey, whatever happened to yada yada, it's open to the public.
It is, yes.
Great.
Yep,
Great.
you have to
Thank
sign
you.
up, you have to sign up for an account first.
Yeah.
But yeah, after you do that, it's accessible to the public. Yep.
That's great, that's great. All right, I'll do that tomorrow. All right. And I'm with you, Alex, and I'm with Tom. I've been advocating, I hope to stick. I understand on the timing issue, I just wanted to relate. Sarah made a very good point to me last week at our meeting that, I can't stand anything past 10 just because I'm not as bright after 10. I'm really good at 6 a.m., but I'm not great at 10 p.m. And she said, for other people, they've got little kids at home. So she didn't want to change the time, but I think Zooming in would give us all a far greater flexibility. So,
Agreed.
So we're good for 2 more hours for you, Marjorie. It's only 8:15.
I know. Hey, there was a time, my
Thanks for-
friend, when I
thanks for
could
letting
go
me
way
know.
past midnight.
Moving right along, unless we're all set?
Yep.
Okay. MACC, the e-handbook and annual membership is next on our discussion list. I believe, those haven't been sent out, have they?
Well, it's something that you, as members, can access online. But I
Yeah.
think Stacy just wanted to clarify that, because I think we were under the impression that you were going to have access like year after, to the handbook for multiple years, but you only get access until we renew your membership, so we just wanted to update you on that. It's not.
Do we have to change our login as well?
Perhaps, we'll find out the specifics.
Yeah.
It can be difficult communicating with MACC sometimes because they're a volunteer organization. They don't always have staff on duty, so we're trying our best to get clarification there as far as how you can use them as a resource and how you can access the e-handbook, and once we get that information, we'll get it out to everybody.
Right, okay, great.
I'm gonna cut out. I'm sorry, I have to go, but I just want to say bye.
Okay,
Bye.
we're
Thanks,
still good
Alex.
with the quorum.
Okay.
Thanks,
Sure.
Alex.
Alex.
Take care. Bylaw Review Subcommittee is next on our list. One thing that I would mention before anyone else speaks is I was hoping to get information from Marjorie and Rich, now that you're a voting member. I'd like to get some feedback from you on the draft proposals that we do have.
Mr. Commissioner, I have my notes right here. I've been working on it. I think you said you wanted it by the 22nd.
Yes, by our next meeting. It's really
And I
not
will-
on our agenda tonight, but,
I will have that for you.
okay, so
No,
what,
I will too, but it's just regulation 25, right? Is there another
exactly.
one?
No,
Nope, just Rec 25, yep.
Okay, great, I'm in.
so once we have that, then as a review committee, we can take a look at what the concerns are from everybody and make whatever adjustments we feel necessary to make on that, bring it back. And we've gone through this now a couple of times with the select board. We had a meeting on Monday night, both Drew and I were there to outline the procedures and the steps and everything that we've done. And there was a lot of clarity that was brought out on Monday night, thankfully.
Yep.
And everybody does now understand that this commission is wide open. We talk to people. There's been multiple opportunities to address the commission on Regulation 25. The email that I sent out, I forget the exact date, June 5th or 4th or something, I answered all of the questions and concerns that people had, and basically told them the process. If you want to speak with the commission, request an agenda item, and that goes into the office, and as chair, I would, as the chair, I would look at it and approve it, and we'd move on it from there, rather than just have somebody wait 3 hours for a public comment, or 4 hours, whatever the case may be. So we're proceeding along.
What
What's
do
it?
we want to do, Cole, with the request at Monday's meeting of the select board for a workshop? Do we want to answer that question or move forward? I don't know. It just seemed to be hovering there. It was the only thing that wasn't put away nicely.
Who asked that question?
I don't,
It was the group from the
PBA.
Papaneset Beach
PBA.
Association.
Yeah, that came up not at last Monday's, but the previous select board meeting.
I think the
and-
select board had basically deferred everything back to the Concom, so nobody on the select board said the Concom has to host a workshop.
Right.
That's not how the meeting ended.
Basic,
No, there were just so many people, yeah, I know, I'm
Yeah.
trying to be sensitive to everybody. There were so many people who said, well, then, if there's no objection, why don't we just have one? And I just want to say this for the record, I hope this is an open meeting and everybody hears me, is that I think they've had great opportunities to speak and to be heard, and I think the Concom was particularly responsive to concerns, both at our meetings, and I believe Steve, if Steve is still in the room?
yes, he is.
Steve, yeah, Steve, I believe you went out to one of the PBA's meetings and
Yeah.
spent time with them.
I spent 2
Yeah,
hours with their, 3 of their members, and
Yeah, that's what I thought, and I
I'm
believe,
surprised they're still
Paul,
asking
you
for
did
a
as
workshop,
well.
because we went through in really high detail on everything, on the proposed
That's what I thought.
Regulation 25 changes.
Right.
We broke everything down into minute details
Mm-hmm.
and went through it, and I thought they were satisfied. So they're still asking for a workshop?
They're
Man,
still
they
asking, right up to, and I don't mind
Okay.
speaking publicly,
I'm
right up to
surprised at
3
that.
o'clock this afternoon. So I want to say, love the idea of a workshop, but my last public, and now I'll restate it again, opinion on it is that Concon and every other group, ZBA probably goes through it, Board of Health, et cetera, if we put together a tight workshop for every wonderful group that comes before us with important, wonderful ideas, that's all we'd be doing is individual workshops. And I really believe that, particularly, I don't know about the other commissions, but I know for the Concom, I feel very comfortable saying that we give every opportunity for what is as close to a workshop. they have the opportunity to come and to be heard and to ask questions. And I know in this particular case, between Steve Cook and Paul as the chairman, gosh, I think the opportunity to talk about dialogue, they kept asking for dialogue, and I respect that, but I think I would just like us to all, I want to hear everybody else, and if we all agree, maybe, Paul, we should send something and say, go ahead and have your own workshop and invite us if you want, but the Concon just can't take responsibility for organizing and executing it. I don't think, that's my personal opinion.
Right. My view on it is, the first select board meeting, Drew brought in the procedures for amending the bylaw regulations under Mashpee's Home Rule Authority. It's 5 bullet points, and it takes the reader through the process, step by step by step by step. Those are the steps that we've followed on Regulation 12, 27, 30, and now we're on 25. So for us to step out of process and protocol only opens the door for anybody who's either not happy or not satisfied in the end to appeal and say, wait a minute, why is it a different process? Now all of a sudden you have a regulation that's a result of a workshop meeting with this one and that one, and that it's just, it's not in the process. And then it really wasn't quite understood 2 weeks ago when the select board met, but then when we met on Monday night, and both Drew and I were there, Drew went through it with them, step by step by step by step. And it was crystal clear. We're working on regulatory language. Workshops are wonderful. I have no objections at all to a workshop, but not when you're developing policy for the town. I think the way it's set up and the way we've gone through this time and time and time again is the process. And
I think the only exception was
workshop.
when we were pushing for the bylaw change to expand the buffer zone by 50 feet, we held multiple workshops with multiple associations because you had to, because that.
I remember I went to a few of them.
It comes down to a vote of the public.
Right.
And when you're changing bylaw language, you are changing standards that affect thousands of homeowners because it's umbrella language. So an increase, a 50-foot increase in the buffer zone, obviously that's going to impact everybody within all areas of wetlands jurisdiction. So, there are circumstances and scenarios where workshops are absolutely essential. And I would say that anytime you're changing bylaw language, unless it's something extremely minor, that a workshop is absolutely encouraged and necessary.
What were the regulations that Paul referenced, Drew, that you brought to the first select meeting?
We mentioned regulations 12, which is mitigation, regulation 27, which is docks, piers, and floats, regulation 30, which is prevention of pollution, and most recently, regulation 25, which we are currently working on, land subject to coastal storm flow.
Okay, and did you cite specifically in terms of the process something that I could?
I just iterated and clarified the difference between changing bylaw language, which you have to go through an article at town meeting and a vote of residents and state approval as well. And then the Home Rule Authority, which is for regulatory change, which is posting of public meetings, advertising of public meetings in the local paper, posting a public meeting for public comment, and promulgation. But the main difference between the two is one requires town meeting and the other one doesn't.
And so, if we articulate the next 2 or 3 steps, we go through. Are we going to have one more hearing and then we're going to go to promulgation on 25?
I don't think there's any way of predicting that at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We still have to have legal review, Marjorie, before we even have a public comment. So
That's right.
I think things are still kind of bouncing around a bit as far as scheduling and timeline. We'll have a much.
I don't need a schedule. I want to make sure I've got it right in my head.
Yeah.
That we go to town council, and then when it comes back, we have one more public hearing, and then we go to promulgation.
Yeah, at least one public hearing, unless the commission feels that another one is necessary. You're not beholden to just one. It's all based on the feedback you get at that time. But traditionally, yes, it's been one.
Okay, but plenty more bites at the apple for anyone that doesn't feel as though
Absolutely.
whatever. Okay, good.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Commissioner?
Yes.
In regards to, like it says, it goes to legal counsel. Does the commission of the town take the recommendation from the legal counsel, whether it's positive or negative, and still move forward with what you want to propose in the bylaws?
I don't believe, if legal counsel has an objection to language that's in our revisions as not being, not able to legally uphold that, I think we would go back to the subcommittee and start doing our homework to change it. It would be folly for the commission to move forward against legal advice. So, yeah, if it comes back with a negative review, you know, you need to fix this or you need to change that, we would have to follow those recommendations.
I don't think we've had any examples, because every regulation we've amended under the Home Rule Authority has gone through legal review. And really, at best, the changes are just minor word changes and sentence structure, or, you know, things, very minor edits. As far as the spirit and intent, there's never been, at least in my time, legal feedback that's changed what the final draft looks like in any substantial way. But that can change moving forward, because every regulation deals with a different subject matter. And some impact, you know, a smaller section of the population, where others impact a larger section of the population. So all of that goes into consideration as far as the level and scope of legal feedback.
Right. And we're dealing with a different legal counsel all of a sudden,
Yeah, we have
too.
new legal counsel,
So
too.
we really don't know what to expect until we start working with KP Law. I will say, though, that based on what I saw tonight from the Cape Cod Commission and that higher order of performance standards that they didn't show or talk about, but I took off of their website, I didn't see a single thing there that's contradictory to what we have in our draft. In fact, it's the exact same language. So I think we're in pretty good shape with it. There's going to be tweaks, I know that. Yeah. But I think we have a fairly solid document right now. But to be continued. I still want to hear from the rest of the commission.
To be continued, yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Well, you know, Paul, after what we heard tonight, too, I'd really like the opportunity to review the model bylaw and regulations and put it against the current draft.
Yep.
So whenever the most appropriate time would be to submit those comments, if it's before you all meet again or after you meet.
It would be great to have it by the 22nd,
Like
but
now.
as a realist,
Okay.
I would say, you know, first meeting in September or something, so we can really get on the table. I know
Sure.
I'll be reviewing the buffer zone performance standards they have to see how they land. I know that's, as we all know, that's a point of discussion.
Sure.
So I'll be looking at that and giving some further comments on that.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'd really love to consider if we are able to adopt kind of a more scientifically grounded buffer zone that's not uniform across the entire town, but is really based on, you know, some of the morphological features that we're looking to protect.
I picked up on the graphic. You could see that it kind of swirled and swayed.
Sure.
and it's all elevation.
Sure.
Uniform.
Sure.
Elevation dependent, I'm sure.
Sure, and then at the same time, I'd like to, you know, have a conversation about how we can turn that into a layer that would be available on the Mashpee interactive map, just for applicants or something, so that you know, we could make that model.
Right now, on the interactive map, we have the 150-foot
Right.
buffer to the flood zone.
Right.
So that's,
Yeah.
you know, that's what was there now. But
That's
that
what
can
they're
be-
using
that can
now.
be edited or whatnot, so.
Sure, maybe even just a link to what these tools are, so we could get them in the hands of the
It'd be a
applicants.
tough layer to draw out. It wouldn't go up as quick as the 150 went up,
No.
because you're going to have all these variations depending on the
Yeah.
topography.
We'd have to get the model, yeah, and update it.
Maybe they have it. Maybe,
Yeah, they might.
I'm sure they do have the
They've
the
got
data,
Borrow it from
The layer, yeah.
the layers they have.
right.
yeah,
Incorporate into our own
just for
GIS.
Mashpee.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and then, you know, I thought their suggestion of considering a third-party review of applications that are within maybe sensitive areas within the floodplain from a coastal geologist or somebody could really help us understand some of the granular mechanics of those impacts of concern
Sure.
would be really cool to build into the bylaw as well.
Yeah.
It's already in there. It's called 53G. It allows the commission to spend their revolving funds, which is the bylaw fees that go into a separate account for the hiring of consultants for peer review.
Cool.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
already there.
great.
Yeah, on any project
Great.
that we don't feel comfortable, you know, because it's highly technical, we have the ability to call in a
Yep.
consultant at
How
the
does-
expense of the applicant.
That impact the timeline, though, if we have so many days to
does.
process?
It does.
Does it like pause it, or do we have to?
Oh, there's no determination made until that assessment is
So just be
completed.
You don't,
continued.
yeah,
Yes,
you
could
you
you-
just
I
don't
see.
close the public hearing, because
I
once you
see.
vote to close the public hearing, the
Then the
21
21
days
days.
clock starts.
Okay.
Yeah, we have one case before us right now that's been for quite some time now going on,
Sure.
because we're waiting for responses from their
see.
reports.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay. Anything else on the subcommittee? We're good with that? Okay, Town Council legal opinion on Chapter 108 flow neutral. Quite some time ago, and I forget which job it was, I know Marjorie had mentioned, have we gone to Town Council about this flow neutral? Can we get an opinion? I spoke to the town manager about it, and it did go up to KP Law, and they came back with a lot of information on flow neutral. The most important thing is that they made it crystal clear that it is not jurisdictional for the Conservation Commission. The flow neutral bylaw is something that is jurisdictional for either the health agent through the Board of Health or the Sewer Commission, and no one else. However, they also did, in their opinion, say that the idea of modified parcels in use of sewer service areas, they clarified that, and they said that a sewer service area is any area either existing or planned according to the 2015 CWMP. So we look at phase 1, phase 2, which phase 1 is almost, I guess, completely finished except for the one little piece.
Yeah.
Phase 2 will get in there and get completed, but if a job comes across and they're asking for that 5th bedroom, and they're even in phase 5, which is down, I don't know, 2035, 2040, who knows when, that flow neutral bylaw does apply to that. And they would have to go to the Board of Health or the Sewer Commission if they were in one of the phases and the plant was operating, and they would have to present all that information, and they would need a variance. They would have to go through the steps. And so when we look at these proposals for a 5th bedroom, and we see that it doesn't match up with 108, it's not our jurisdiction, but I really believe that we are entitled to say, pending a variance that would be granted under flow neutral 108, because, I mean, we're going to condition a project, and we don't even know if it's going to fly.
It could easily be a condition of an order of conditions.
Right.
That was good information to get revealed about future planning stages.
Yeah, no
regardless
one
if
ever-
they're 5, 10, 20, 30 years down the road.
Right.
If they're part of a phase and they're shown on a map or a plan, 108 applies. So it's
Right.
good, definitely good clarification.
And it really, I mean, I know it's part of the notice of intent for our wastewater program, our permit, so it makes all the sense in the world, even though the phase isn't there, we're looking at it, we're counting on it, and we're taking loans based on that. So, you know, we don't want to jeopardize the loan structure and the forgiveness rates that the town can attain.
Can we get a copy of that?
Yeah, it's,
yes.
the town manager said it's no longer
Yeah, he's
confidential.
freed that up, I have it. and-
Okay.
Or you
Sure,
can-
you
Yeah,
have
it'd be
it as
interesting
well.
for me to
You
have
might
that.
as well
yeah.
send it
See
out,
yeah.
because I,
Okay, great, yeah.
Want to get it? All the commissioners?
I
Yeah.
think
So,
every commissioner should
so
have it.
basically, it's not our jurisdiction, but we can bring it up and make it a condition of
Yeah.
in a order of conditions.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Saying, that, okay, you need a variance or you need Board of Health approvals for, okay.
and,
We have our finger in the pie.
yeah, and,
I just don't
Well,
wanna-
I'm really glad, I appreciate you following up on that, Paul, and I agree with Drew. It's good clarification.
Yeah, something we don't have to
Okay,
dwell on
yeah, because
when we're
it's
asking
really
questions,
not
but,
black.
Yeah, you could just simply condition it.
Yeah.
You know, and not have to spend a lot of time
Yeah.
deliberating over it. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
We should
Another
put
way to
this
get out of here
in a-
earlier.
Yeah, I know, it's just saying, okay, we don't have to dwell on that anymore, okay, let's keep it moving. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right, but
Okay.
we put that in a time bottle, because 5 years from now, it's not gonna be an issue, because everybody's gonna expect that jurisdictionally, we all overlap. There's gonna be more gray areas than any of us ever predict.
well, I thought the presenters tonight from the Cape Cod Commission brought up some interesting concepts and ideas that planning, zoning, and
Yeah.
Concom should all sit down and look at these floodplain regulations and all get on the same page.
Good to have consistency.
There's
They
a
really
lot
do.
of gray areas,
And
yeah.
we're all kind of working out of our own silos, and they don't match up. So there's still a lot of work to do, a lot.
Is there a map now that breaks down the town as far as the sewer project goes and what phases?
Yes.
There is. It's
Yep.
on the Sewer Commission webpage on the town's website. You can view it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sure.
It's a huge file. I'd like to say, let's just send it out, but it's like 35
Yeah,
megabytes.
please go on the
Crazy.
website.
But can we is it linked in on the, town
Yeah,
website?
Yeah.
it's under
Yeah,
the Sewer
Sewer Commission,
Commission's webpage
Yeah.
on the town's website.
I have a direct link. I
Fascinating.
can send that out. That wouldn't be open meeting law violation, would it, for me to send that link out?
No, not at all.
I'll
That'd
send
be
that link
great.
out to everybody, so you'll go right
That'd
to
be
the map.
great.
Thank
And
you.
it actually takes a few minutes for it to open up,
Yeah,
depending
it's a
on your
big file.
connectivity.
All right, good.
Okay, and as an aside with all of this, I know there's been a lot of discussion at our meetings about, well, why don't we just wait until the zoning board rules, or why don't we wait for the health board? I know, Margie, you've brought this up many, many times. And then there was the question of plans, and we see one set of plans and somebody else sees another set of plans. So I started digging through our regulations, and I found something that I really think, certainly you have to bring it before the bylaw review subcommittee, but we have some language in our Regulation 3 that needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah.
And it comes under 3A5. And it talks about the hearing process when other Mashpee board approvals are needed. And, you know, I get the idea that the permit, they don't need to have the permit, you know, because the boards are working on it. But it specifically says in that according to the same plan submitted as part of the notice of intent to the Conservation Commission. What I've seen many times is that we see a footprint and that's all we see, and then everybody else is seeing architectural drawing. You brought this up, Marjorie, at a hearing the last time we met, or maybe the time before that.
Right.
And then sometimes we get plans and they don't even have the septic system profile on it. We know that's got to go into the Board of Health. So I really think that we should look at 3A5 and reword that so that we make it clear that everybody that's in the permitting process should be working off the same plans. We shouldn't be looking at just this, we should be looking at everything. And I know a lot of it may have nothing to do with anything, but it just might. So
But it
I
should
really
just be
think
the
those plans
process.
should be,
Yeah.
It should be in the interest of consistency, so
Right.
everyone's looking at the same plan.
Transparency.
Well, I
too.
agree wholeheartedly, because some of the presentations and some of the denials that we voted on were houses that we didn't have architectural plans, and we asked questions
And then
saying,
it all
okay,
came
what's
out.
the foundation? What's, I just looking at a plan, I can see that you have elevation 4 and the flood elevation 13, so you get 9 feet of
Right.
wall there.
right.
And then when you ask the question, the answer comes out, well, yeah, we're going to have wood frame walls, but it has flood vents. Well,
Right.
was it for 325 Monomoskoye? Well, that's in a coastal A zone, so that doesn't fly.
Right.
So those are the things we had to drag the information out of these
Sure.
presenters,
And that would cut down on the
The
time.
current wording, and I think this is in Regulation 3, is that it's in one of the regulations under submittal requirements and plans, is
Right.
that if you wanted to see architectural plans, you can require them.
Right.
But it doesn't say architectural
Right.
plans are required in every instance.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, that is what could be cleaned up, but it's not, I wouldn't, cast blame on the applicants, because it is discretionary amongst
Right.
the commissioners. So,
Right.
I wouldn't just say it's the applicants giving us, withholding information. That's not the case. They read the
No, but it
regulations.
it drags out the time
These
through.
representatives and consultants, yeah. Well, I mean, then you got to make it known, at least in the absence of amending this regulation, that you want to see architectural plans, because currently they're not required. It's discretionary.
Right.
I just want to clarify that, because I don't want to unfairly judge the applicant that they're
No.
withholding something that is normally required, because it's
Right.
not. So.
No,
we
no,
want to
but
change
I
that.
think, I'm sorry, are you done?
I said we
I
want
was
to change
just gonna
that.
say, I think it would help for the applicant to know that it's not their fault. Because otherwise, they think that we're wasting time. And that, you're holding this up again because you're asking for this and asking for
Right.
that. And so I would really love to get to a point of consistency where we don't have to, I remember that night, we were pulling things, like pulling teeth to get the info that could be avoided through a more consistent approach of foreknowledge of what is expected in the application.
And that would cut down on a lot of the time that.
Yeah, continuous,
It sees all
Like,
this
I
stuff.
remember the septic
Complete.
one that you mentioned, that there wasn't a septic cross-section, and then you said, well, it looks like it's gonna be, the bottom of the tank is gonna be in groundwater.
Right,
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's like, why didn't they submit that,
yeah.
plan? So, yeah, it's
So I think we
consistency
need
and,
to-
save
We need
ourselves
to probably get into that
continuances in time, yeah.
and reword that and clean it up a little bit.
Yeah. There's a lot in Reg 3 that can be slimmed out, too.
Yeah.
good.
It's really-
What also caught my eye in Reg 3 was 3A4, compliance with zoning bylaw, Chapter 174, Section 33. The Conservation Commission, this is their purview. They can require, and it says right here, the commission so deems appropriate to get a letter of certification with supporting documentation and explanation from an attorney licensed to practice law within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that certifies the property is subject to the notice of intent is exempt from provisions in Chapter 174, Section 33. I know a lot of times the wetland setback is just not enforced because I think the concept is that it's pre-existing, non-conforming lot. But as a commission that's in charge of wetlands protection, we would have the ability to press on the zoning board and say, hey, listen, we're looking at our regulation right there, 3A4, that says we can ask for a letter from attorney that states specifically that you're exempt from a wetland setback. So there is some language in here that gives us the authority to look at the zoning board and look at the plans that are coming before us, and I think be more proactive rather than reactive, waiting to see what they say. We can push and say, listen, we see this as a problem. I know there was one job that came along a while back, and they were proposing to change a shed or a garage into a fairly substantial structure. It was like 600 or 700 square feet, and it was right on the border. I think it was like 5 feet off the property line, and the salt marsh was right there. And
Right.
that would be a classic example of us saying to the ZBA, hey, you tell us that this is exempt from a wetland setback because I'm not seeing it. So anyways, I saw that one only by accident because I was looking for this stuff on plans and, I came across that. So there's some information here that we should kick around a little bit more as a commission and
That should be the next reg up for review after 25.
It's the next reg, get
Yeah.
25 done and then move on.
I thought we were gonna go to 31 with fertilizers and really start some people talking, but
I
I
think
think-
getting submittal requirements is a pretty good
yeah,
priority.
that's important. Okay, anyways, those are just asides from,
Those are two, that's two very, very, very good thought processes that we've moved along tonight. Makes me happy.
okay.
Very
The next thing on our agenda is the Chapter 173 revisions that Drew has put together for Regulation 1 on Chapter 173, and I think most of you know the situation, but if not, Drew can
Yeah.
give us the Reader's Digest abridged version.
So, regulation, chapter 173 deals with conservation lands, 172 is wetlands. And there's only one regulation under chapter 173, it's entitled Regulation 1, and it deals with allowable and prohibited uses on conservation lands. It's pretty clear cut, no motorized vehicles, no illegal dumping, no consumption of alcohol, illegal drugs, the usual kind of list you would expect amongst prohibited activities. And then there are other activities that are listed as, requiring permission, either from the commission or the conservation department or both, however we want to word that. And those are things like, if someone requested overnight camping or erecting a hunting blind or putting up a trail camera, or many other things, putting up a sign, advertising something, which I don't think we should ever allow. But anyway. So this is specifically dealing with trail cameras because we had a episode recently that started out harmless enough and then just exploded into something I don't think we've ever encountered before as far as the specificity of the language that we currently have under Regulation 1 as it pertains to trail cameras in particular. So it's the recommendation that we add that language in specific to trail cameras. With today's social media, The use of social media, the use of cameras. Cameras are pretty much everywhere, and people escape to the woods to kind of get away from technology and cameras and whatnot. And I'm not saying that all cameras are put up for nefarious purposes, but nonetheless, any sort of private use of public conservation land absolutely requires the permission of the Conservation Commission and Conservation Department. I don't think there's any debating that at all, because to ignore that, you are saying anyone can pretty much do whatever they want on publicly accessible lands, including creating trails from their backyard into conservation land. So, in the interest of just making sure that we've got all bases covered here, to put in that specific language regarding trail cameras, if that's what's necessary and people can't understand the fact that they don't own property and they can't be expected to have a right to do what they want on property they don't own, which seems to me to be blatant common sense, we'll add in this specific language to make it crystal clear. You can't put trail cameras up without permission. And we can develop a form, to kind of, for all uses, whether it's trail cameras or a request for day camping or overnight camping or whatever it is, we could just develop a permission form. And, if the commission wants to have staff handle it, that's fine, or if you want to review it, that's fine. But at least we can add in this language to make it more specific.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can I make a recommendation, Drew?
Sure.
Yeah, I thought that whole incident was, I can't believe it blew up into what it did. I'm not even sure what the current status is. I think they're still suing us, aren't they?
Well, it's at a threat level right now.
At a threat level, okay. But anyway, so I agree with you, but I would expand it to say one of those phrases that we use these days to encompass all electronic devices that record.
Yeah, I did mention that to Drew in the emails. I said
The
that.
voice and the image and the whatever, so that they can't say,
Yeah.
oh, well, it wasn't a trail cam, it was a whatever.
Absolutely.
I said electronic monitoring devices. I think that's
It
covered.
just-
If
there
this
are
has
so
taught us
many
any
now.
lesson, it's that you can't get specific enough.
Right.
They're tiny now,
Well,
the
can't
ones
keep
that
up
they've
with
been finding
technology.
toilets, I don't even want to talk about it, but they're so small now
Oh, yeah.
that nobody
Yeah.
would,
We can just add in electric devices and just emphasize, regardless of what it is, you need to
Right.
get permission. It's really the bottom line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right. And audio too, not just video, audio too.
Well, I think the words electronic monitoring devices covers all audio and
That
video.
covers it, yeah.
Yeah, it covers the
Yeah,
bases,
there's that boilerplate language,
Yeah.
Steve. Yeah, I agree.
And then,
So are we saying that, just because everybody's got a phone, they might be taking a video or?
they can't post them on the property, like adhere them
No,
to a
he
tree.
attached it to the
Put it on a,
Attached
put it on
to
a
a
post
tree
just to
or-
watch,
Yeah.
Great.
But if somebody has like a handheld?
No.
And if you're walking around with it in your hand, you're passively there, not a problem at
It's
all.
not a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really a private matter between, if people have an issue of being filmed while they're walking down a trail by somebody else with a cell phone cam,
Yeah.
Yeah.
they could take it up with each other. How are we supposed to enforce something like that?
Right.
Was
You
there any
can't-
signage
can't,
just
yeah.
to say, we?
If there is stuff on property, there would be a sign put up,
Yeah.
monitoring on property or something like that, or smile, you're on camera, just so they know. But that would dictate, if a permission slip was permitted. So say a permission slip was permitted for Mashpee River, someone wants to put a deer camera up there or whatever the deal may
Sure.
be. Then I would just go to the parking lot, pop the sign up, and that'd be it.
And do we have signs talking about what we're prohibiting?
We have the
Yeah,
conservation.
there are signs that are made that they kind of list, in general, because you can only put so much on a sign, or you
Sure.
make it so wordy that people are just going to look at it and not pay attention to it. So it highlights some of the major points as far as prohibited activities, with the town seal, Conservation Commission name on it, so we have signs like that.
So they're commission signs, they're not department signs?
They're Conservation.
The
Department
Conservation
signs.
Commission
They're
signs.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Would we be able to see, just because I know, and I think Alex does this too, but this is what I
Oh, I
do
can make a
for
copy
work.
and-
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could take a look and,
Yeah, you pull into the
propose some-
parking lot to go down to Santua Fish Ladder, and there's the
gosh.
signs are right
Every
there.
parking lot.
Pickerel Cove.
Pond has
yeah.
one.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I'd be interested to take a
Mashpee
look
Woodlands,
at
yeah.
what the
Absolutely.
signs look like and what they say and.
Yep.
I will say there's been a huge uptick in graffiti.
Sure.
So that we can all,
Notice that.
yeah, unfortunately, really not good stuff at all. So if you
Right.
are on any property, it's not just isolated to one property.
Sure.
It is, a pandemic around town. So if you see any bumper stickers, any graffiti or anything like that, just let me know right away and I'll go
Okay.
take care of it ASAP. The one the other day was horrible.
Which one was that on the?
That was Noisy Hole
We're
Conservation.
not going to say what
Yeah,
it
I
said,
don't wanna.
because I don't want to promote that.
But it was at Noisy Hole Conservation, and it was the whole billboard. So just let me know if you see anything, and that's that.
Polycarbonate, and we could scrub it right off.
Yeah, worked out great. But yeah,
So in that instance, would you put up some sort of security camera?
we have put them up in properties on parking lots, but when it comes to the one at Noisy Hole, it's a main road. So I have game cams. I would run out of space before I could even
Fair enough.
get to it, unfortunately.
Fair enough.
But when it comes to like parking lots like Pickle Cove and things, we do put them up. It's not hit or miss. It's pretty much miss because people see it and they just relocate their activities, or they just relocate the camera. So,
Fair enough. Thank you. The info.
Okay, so in terms of procedure, can we have the commissioners read through this? I know you sent it out and
It
take a
was all
vote.
Today, so we
Right.
could do that at maybe
could
at
have-
August 22nd.
Yeah,
the
take a
next
vote
meeting.
on it, and then this would have to go up to legal counsel to get reviewed, or it's
I'll
minor,
ask town
maybe
manager
not.
about it. I think it might be something as simple
Yeah.
but we can certainly do that, just to make sure that we're not running afoul of any
Right,
authority, so.
okay.
He's aware.
Yep,
He's aware. He's
Yeah, I'm sure, yeah.
okay, makes sense.
And so,
right.
could
What
we
are-
also, on the agenda, while we're discussing that, take a look at the signage and how we're going to be communicating this out?
yes,
Okay.
I can.
Okay,
You know what? I can send that out tomorrow.
Oh, that'd be great.
So yeah, I'd get that out tomorrow
Okay.
along with some of the other emails. That's not a problem.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Water quality issues, anybody have anything they'd like to bring up? Ongoing discussion item.
I got my shellfish permit, and clamming is fantastic this year.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
The shellfish don't work unless you harvest them.
I had a resource to share, if this is appropriate. The Chesapeake Urban Stormwater Professionals Group, part of the Chesapeake Stormwater Network, is offering a free 14-week urban stormwater training course, and it looks really interesting. I think it would dovetail with a lot of the conversations we're having in terms of regulatory and bylaw updates and how we're looking at just how we're managing water over impervious surfaces. I would be happy to forward that email out to the conservation staff and the commissioners if that wouldn't violate open meeting law. But the registration is open until August 26th for that free course.
Online.
It's online. Yep, all of it's online. They also have a webinar series with recordings. That it's really interesting
Yeah.
subject matter.
Great.
So,
I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay,
Forward
yeah,
that
I'd be
along.
glad to send that out. Sure.
Great, great. Anything else on water quality from anyone? No, we're good? Communication,
good.
correspondence, we don't have anything pressing on that. Any additional topics I have on my list here, the 2025 schedule?
Yes.
Do we
Which it
have
sounds
that?
like.
Yeah, that was gonna be kind of rolled into the next
Yeah.
meeting
The-
as far as
okay.
like all the things we're discussing earlier about time, meeting times and public
Okay,
comment,
yep.
all that.
Gotcha.
consumes all that stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey,
Okay,
you know
so
what
we're-
bothered me? I
Yes,
hope
go
she's
ahead.
listening. We didn't give a proper farewell to Erin. I feel like she did a great job. Did she get recognized at the select board meeting at all, or?
Yes, they accepted her resignation, and they sent a letter of regret, I believe.
I just think that she
And
was a,
I thanked her for her time and the amount of work that she put in as she, moved from associate to full, and, yeah, you always hate to see people go.
yeah, and she's a great person. She went to a lot of trouble to donate her time to these issues in this commission, and I just wanted to mark it, that she was great.
Yeah. I know she called my house more than once and said, the street's flooding. I tell her, get a video, take a video of that so we can take a look at it. And
And she had a lot of stuff in her life she was juggling.
Yeah.
So anyway, good, I'm glad. All right.
duly noted.
The the only additional topic is, do we have a status on all the appeals that are going on? Do you have to say, okay, where things are at, with the,
Is that maybe
you know,
executive
with-
session?
Yeah, we can discuss that more at the executive session.
Okay.
Or not the we can discuss it more at the executive session, but
Okay.
no, as of right now, on most of them we don't, but, yeah.
Wait a minute, do we have an exec session coming up now?
No.
No,
Oh,
no.
No, not
No,
until
in
September
September.
12th.
September
we're hoping
12th,
for.
and then we still need confirmation from legal counsel to ensure they can make it.
Oh, okay, good. All right.
I'd just be interested in say,
Pencil in
okay,
September 12th at 5
what's on the
o'clock.
list, and say, what's the status of it?
Right.
So then we all kind of all know, say, oh, look at one piece of paper, okay, this is where that one's at, this is,
So
something
I'm
like that.
assuming.
I know
all
you
of-
guys know that, but I haven't really kept up with,
Yeah, we always send out emails to all the commissioners to let them know what the status of appeals are for any appeal that's, what timeline. But we're beholden to state timelines and town council availability, so,
yeah,
as that information comes in, I always forward it out to everybody.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
continue to do that.
okay. I just need to organize myself a little better on that end of it.
Create a subfile.
There you go.
I do.
Appeals.
Come on, Steve, get organized here, man.
And everything's been forwarded over to KP Law, and they're
We
reviewing.
have the entire administrative.
What's
record
active
from
and-
91 Muscogee.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Okey-doke. If there's no other questions, topics, concerns, I
Move to adjourn.
thank you, Steve.
Second.
Thank you, Marjorie. You sure? Okay, let me take a roll call vote. I don't think there's any discussion on that. Steve?
Yes.
Marjorie?
Yes, sir.
Richard?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well.